Okay, so just looking ahead, this is what the Roman Empire looked at its peak, and you can kind of scan over this, in my lecture notes later on. But you remember we opened up the course over here in the Mesopotamian area, and you can see how much. And if you can remember from some of the earlier empires, especially like the Persian Empire, you moved more east from Mesopotamia, whereas the Roman Empire is basically Western Europe and surrounding the Mediterranean. So I want to talk in this lecture is kind of lead up to the history of Christianity and the way under Emperor Constantine that it becomes um, officially recognized. So what happened to the Jewish people? Well, if you recall, it was the Persian Empire that allowed the Jewish people to go back and settle in Judea. And then it was under Alexander the Great, the Jewish people fell under control again. But it seemed everything was fine until the Ptolemies, no, the Seleucids took over, specifically a ruler named Antiochus IV. And he tried to force Hellenization. Remember, Hellenization is basically treating the Greek culture as a universal culture and basically trying to force other cultures to assimilate to it. And so there was an intentional forced assimilation under Antiochus IV to the Jews. This led to, things like trying to make the Jewish people sacrifice pork on the altar. So this sparked uh, a revolt. This is known as the Maccabean Revolt. It's his family, led by Matthias and his sons, particularly Judas as a leader, will lead a guerrilla campaign against the Seleucids, and against Jewish people who had sold out. In fact, this sacrifice of the pig, what started the war was Matthias killed a Jewish man who was like, okay, I'll sacrifice, no big deal. And Matthias, you can kind of consider him like a religious zealot, was like, no way, we're not losing our culture this way. So anyway, the Maccabean revolt lasts for a few years, and eventually the Seleucids, the Greeks, signed a peace treaty with Simon, the last of the sons, and he becomes basically priest king over Judea. And It's up until about around 60-ish from the first century when Pompey, one of the figures from the first triumvirate in Rome, marches on Judea and conquers it. So that's where Rome comes in. It's under Pompey that the Jewish people are now under again another foreign yoke. Eventually, time goes by, as we remember from the first Roman lecture, all the stuff, the civil war is going on. It'll be once Augustus, Octavian, Caesar Augustus, comes to power, he places Herod the Great as king of Judea. And Herod, who is not really Jewish, but he is a friend of Augustus, he's the one who set up these major building projects, like Caesarea, the city of Caesarea, the north of Jerusalem, and then also working on the Jewish temple. So, and these are supposedly great building projects. Um, Anyways, without getting to the history of Christianity in the middle of this, by the time you get to about 30 years after the death of Christ, there is a revolt in Jerusalem, and it's led by people that are nicknamed the Zealots. Basically, all that terminology means are these are rebels who don't like imperial Roman rule over them. There's a whole history of revolts. And well, the Romans have had enough around this time period, around late 60s, first century AD or CE. And so the Romans march around Jerusalem and eventually will starve them out and then sack the city. There will be another Jewish revolt known as the Bar Kokhba revolt in around 130. and this one also will lead to further um, um, destruction by the Romans of Jerusalem, around Jerusalem. And that kind of leads to the what they call diaspora of the Jewish people, the spreading out of the Jewish people across the world. Well, at least the known world, right? Middle East areas in Europe, in Asia, um, and this is where, if you think of the name Syria, Palestina, this is where the Romans named this territory that. So that's a quick overview of history of the Jewish people. Um, what were these people? What was kind of the social political situation? I think the real important one here in our limited time, just to like have you focused on, is the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees, students often mix this up. The Pharisees, especially if you read the New Testament, Pharisees are the ones that are mostly engaged in discussion with Christ. Paul of Tarsus, probably the most important figure in Christian history outside of Christ himself, was a Pharisee. All that means is these are basically the religious teachers across the Jewish world. This will eventually become the rabbis that continue, to this day. They're the heroes during the Maccabean revolt because they wanted to keep the Jewish people following the one God and ritualistically pure. Um, and I think why they're always the ones as the kind of like antagonist in the New Testament, at least in the four Gospels, is because, like the Pharisees, Christ is referred to as a teacher with disciples, and so it makes sense that in a lot of ways he's actually very close um, in opinions and in intentions with the Pharisees. Whereas the Essenes, these are just a bunch of people who lived off in the desert and had apocalyptic views of history. We don't know very much about their interaction with Christ. The Zealots, same thing. Usually we just know them as people that were anti Roman, that led to the fall of Jerusalem. And the Sadducees are basically the these are the political people in political power in Jerusalem, mostly located in Jerusalem, controlling the temple cult. So there the Essenes, the Zealots, and the Sadducees all go away after Rome destroys Jerusalem in 70 A.D. Whereas the Pharisees are the ones that continue and preserve Jewish culture. So I think that's important when they're not really the big social political change movers in Jerusalem. That's the Sadducees. Okay. So origins of Christianity is like all the other subjects in this course when we're talking about ancient history and religion. It's hard to figure out what is the most history could tell us about certain people. And so, what I usually like to do is refer to the basic ideas about Christianity, historically speaking. So, first one I would say that I honestly most people miss is the fact that Jesus Christ from Nazareth or Jesus of Nazareth is was mostly referred to as a teacher, a rabbi, and he's oftentimes you read the Gospels, at least from his followers' viewpoint. He's mostly teaching. His most famous teaching style is parables, right? He tells a story, and in this story, it's kind of a roundabout way of teaching you a lesson. Think famous parables being like the prodigal son and the good Samaritan, which are found in the Gospel of Luke exclusively, actually. Um, his message seems to be wrapped around this idea of the coming of the kingdom of God. And pretty much everybody who believes that Jesus of Nazareth is a real person agree that he was put to death by Roman crucifixion. So that's the one area I've found pretty much everybody is in agreement with. And so um, now with the history of Christianity, it seems very early on that his followers ascribe some type of divinity to him. That's something that the early church would argue and debate about. But as early as Paul of Tarsus, or the figure known as the Apostle Paul, he's already universalizing the message of Christianity as not just something for the Jewish people, as like the Jewish Redeemer, but also someone who also it's a message to the whole world, right? And so the New Testament, as it expands, seems to make that case. So that's a general start of Christianity. Is from this person Jesus of Nazareth, and then his disciples, but particularly Paul of Tarsus is big because so much New Testament are is made up of letters that he wrote to the early followers, and so what eventually develops as the institution of the church falls back on these writings. What actually helps the spread of Christianity, believe it or not, is the fact that Rome is kind of a hot mess. That the Hellenism that we saw earlier on, that was really a problem for the Maccabees, was actually something that unified the Roman Empire, because Rome was all about Roman Greek culture. And the fact that there was kind of a common language, built roads, unified the empire, that allowed Christianity to go out and spread, especially in the cities. So women, the lower classes, slaves, but also some people from the aristocracy gravitate toward Christianity. And actually, what probably helps it is the persecution. Persecution against Christianity was very severe, but oftentimes limited and temporal. So, in other words, when it happened, it was pretty bad. All the kind of stuff you probably have heard about with like gladiator games and being fed to lions, tigers, and bears and all that kind of stuff. That all did happen. But it was oftentimes under particular rulers or in particular areas that it happened. Um, so don't have time to go so much into that, but just know that the witness under persecution probably helped the cause, and that's what led to kind of the rise of honoring the martyrs, the people who died for the faith. The earliest theology, the teaching about God and Christianity, revolved on this kind of martyrdom. This like, well, Jesus was crucified. Paul, the apostles, like Paul and Peter, were also killed by the Roman state. So it's almost like natural that the state would attack the faithful ones. So this what leads to, if you're part of a liturgical tradition, why the holy calendar, quote unquote, has all these dates and memorials to the dead saints. But then something happens. Christianity starts to become popular, and some of the first areas in the Middle East, particularly Armenia, around 300, becomes the first kingdom to accept Christianity as a faith. As we'll see later, Ethiopia is another one in Africa that becomes a Christian empire before Rome. So I think that's important. If you look at Armenia, which is still considered a Christian, or it has a heavy number of Christians in it. Same thing with Ethiopia. It goes all the way back here before Rome actually becomes Christianized. So that happens under Emperor Constantine. So Constantine falls under this time period where the empire has gotten so big that they've actually split the empire into two. Well, he comes to power after fighting basically a civil war against a couple of other guys who want to become the emperor. Now, before he fights this big battle at the Milvian Bridge, he actually has a dream, a vision of Christ. And so after this vision, he becomes, he decides to fight in the name of Christianity, as you can see in the notes, wins, becomes emperor, and then one of the first things he does as emperor is to basically say you can't persecute Christianity anymore. So he doesn't officially make Christianity the religion. That'll happen after his death. But this is where it gets started.